the NFL, because obviously this whole season has just been a complete unpredictable mess in a good way. And perhaps no other team that better epitomizes this mess has been the Green Bay Packers, who now control their own destiny after yesterday's 41-17 rout over the Minnesota Vikings. Complete, utter domination and annihilation on the part of the Green Bay Packers. And obviously, this was a team that looked dead in the water. And it was just a couple of weeks ago. They were 4-8. There were rumors swirling that there was some disconnect between the wide receivers and Rodgers. The defense wasn't playing up to snuff. We weren't exactly sure why. The Packers seemingly weren't relying on the run game and Aaron Jones for the last several weeks. There was all this internal strife. And then the schedule eased up a little bit for them. And they started to integrate Christian Watson. He started to emerge. The defense was starting to play better. And now you look up and they're 8-8 and they've won 4 games. And Aaron Rodgers, of course, this is a guy who auditioned to be the host of Jeopardy. He has starred in multiple State Farm commercials. So we know that Aaron Rodgers has always been a bit of a thespian. He's always been one of these people that enjoys the drama and the dramatical aspect of football on the field. And that comes, and there is drama every single time he plays in a season. But what we also know is that this Green Bay Packers team, again, now controls their destiny, and it sets up a juicy, juicy matchup next week that will likely get flexed into the Sunday night NBC game of the week, where you have arguably the NFL's largest, biggest brand in the Green Bay Packers going up against the lowly, once forgotten, overlooked Detroit Lions team, who have been plucky all year, for a chance to go to the playoffs. That's what's on the line. And listen, I've been one to say I loved everything the Detroit Lions did in the offseason. I love Dan Campbell, the energy, the enthusiasm that they play with, that they brought that spirit from Hard Knocks. I absolutely loved it. I bought all my stock in the Detroit Lions, and I'd be thrilled to see them in the postseason. However, with this version of Aaron Rodgers, with this version of Aaron Jones, with this version of the Green Bay Packers defense and special teams, who single-handedly took a 14-3 lead over the Minnesota Vikings midway through the first quarter without Aaron Rodgers having to do anything, this version of the Packers is way more intriguing and would be way more intriguing to watch. And what's interesting is, obviously, teams start to round into form most of the time after Thanksgiving, but it's not necessarily rounding into form is different than establishing your identity as a team. Most teams understand and understood what their identity is maybe by week 5, week 6, if they haven't already going into the season. For whatever reason, it took the Packers all the way until the most thankful day in the United States calendar on Thanksgiving to realize and fully buy in what their identity is, which is we are and should be a run-dependent team whose defense can play at least adequate. We can control the pace, and we can ask Aaron Rodgers to be special on a couple of drives, on a couple of throws, and not for the entirety of the game. And so, again, yesterday, before Aaron Rodgers really even had to do anything meaningful, they're up 14-3 because of special teams and a pick six. 105-yard kickoff return by Keyshawn Nixon, and a pick six of Kirk Cousins. And this was the second consecutive week in which the defense had forced 4 takeaways. Now, perhaps the 4 takeaways isn't always sustainable, but you have a guy in Jair Alexander, tip of the cap to him. He wanted all the Justin Jefferson smoke, just like John Morant and the Grizzlies. Jair Alexander wanted to sprint up the chimney. He was sprinting up the chimney. He wanted all that smoke, and he came out on the other end. and he essentially contained Justin Jefferson in a maximum security prison because he only had one catch for 15 yards, only 5 targets. He absolutely locked him up. In credit to Jair Alexander, he backed up all of the talk. But again, obviously he individually was great, but what did you get on the ground? 14 carries, 111 yards from Aaron Jones. You had 163 rushing yards. And this has been the formula for the Packers over this 4-game win streak, is establishing the run game, relying on their two-back system with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, in their defense that was highly touted in the preseason, playing well. And again, you look at the 4 games, the takeaways, obviously, but against the Bears, 175 rushing yards. Against the Rams, 108 rushing yards, but they had 35 rushes to 30 passes. So again, the offense skewing more towards the run game. Against Miami, it was a slight outlier as far as the run plays, but they still collected 4 takeaways on the defensive side. And then, as I mentioned, against the Vikings, they were really held to 3 points up until midway through the third. So those last 2 touchdowns were pretty much meaningless. The defense collected 4 takeaways. And again, 163 rushing yards on the ground. So this can be the formula for the Packers. Now, again, from the Vikings angle for Justin Jefferson, I think that this was truly a fluke performance. It's unlikely that he is going to only amass 1 catch in a game. I just don't see that happening. He's too good. Again, give credit to Jair Alexander, who was on him for, I think, 60% of the snaps, and the Packers defense for shutting him out. But from the Minnesota Vikings angle, this is precisely why we have so much, and not just we, Minnesotans, people that live outside of the state. This is why we all have this trepidation and this anxiety about buying into the Minnesota Vikings, because we're just not sure which Kirk Cousins, which Minnesota Vikings team are we going to get? Are we going to get the competitive Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings that we saw in the win at the Buffalo Bills in overtime, or the one that we saw in the second half against the Indianapolis Colts that showed that toughness? Or are we going to see them get blown out because in 3 of their 4 losses, they haven't even been competitive? They have played absolutely horrendously. And some of these games were at home. Obviously, early in the season, they lost at Philly 24-7. They got absolutely destroyed at home against Dallas Cowboys without Dak Prescott. With Cooper Rush, they lost 40-3 at home. And now they lose 41-17. That's 3 of their 4 losses. And again, versus the Packers, and that wasn't even close. So they're just impossible to trust, which is why they're impossible to kind of embrace in this postseason, because you just don't know which version of them you're going to get. So, yes, they'll be at home, but no one really trusts them. The Packers, on the other end, this is a team that is clearly streaking into the playoffs. And again, it sets up a tremendous game next week against the Detroit Lions, a divisional opponent for the right to go to the postseason. I know the Seattle Seahawks, there's technically a situation in which for the Detroit Lions, if the Lions win, but the Seahawks then need to lose. But from the Packers, win and they're in. That's it. That's it. And Aaron Rodgers, with this version of the Packers defense in the playoffs, that's going to be very intriguing. Very intriguing.